Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those of you joining us in the various time zones. My name is Raymond Karam, and I'm the Chief Program and Development Officer here at AGSIW. We have close to 300 attendees registered for this webinar today, and I'm delighted to welcome you all from across the globe. Today's topic is not new for us at AGSIW. In fact, we've been investigating and analyzing developments in the Horn of Africa region and the linkages with the Gulf Arab countries for a number of years, through workshops, public panels, publications, and a full-day conference that took place last December in Abu Dhabi, where we first met some of the speakers joining us today. You can find all this relevant information on our website, agsw.org, and I will shortly share a link through the chat function to help you access it easily. A number of new developments have since refocused our attention on the Horn of Africa and wider Red Sea region, and to help us further analyze these events and their meaning, we're very excited to welcome a stellar lineup today with some of the most knowledgeable and experienced voices on this topic. First, joining us from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia is Dr. Abdulaziz, the chairman and founder of the Gulf Research Center. Dr. Sagar is also the president of the Sagar Group Holding in Saudi Arabia, where he is active in the fields of information technology, aviation services, and investments. He is a member of the Mecca Province Council and serves on the advisory board to various organizations. Ambassador Alex Rondos is the EU matters relating to the Horn of Africa security, political life, development, and regional cooperation. Previously, he was an advisor to the Foreign Minister of Greece, counseling and implementing policy in the Southeastern Europe region and the Middle East. He has also worked for the World Bank as a specialist on social and non-governmental organization issues. Mr. Abdul Mohammed serves as Chief of Staff and Senior Political Advisor of the African Union High-Level Implementation Panel for Sudan and South Sudan, chaired by Thabo Mbeki, former President of South Africa. He was previously the Acting Director of the AU-UN Hybrid Operation and Darfur's Political Department, Chairperson of the Darfur Dialogue and Consultation, and UNICEF's representative to the Africa Union. He has also been an advisor to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia on peace and reconciliation issues in the Horn of Africa. Over the last 25 years, he has worked in Ethiopia, Sudan, and Kenya. Last but not least is Kate Almquist Knopf, who has served as director of the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, an academic institution within the US Department of Defense since July 2014. She has spent most of her career focused on the intersection of security and development in Africa. From 2001 to 2009, she held several senior positions at the US Agency for International Development, including as Assistant Administrator for Africa, Sudan Mission Director, Deputy Assistant Administrator for Africa, and Special Assistant and Senior Policy Advisor to the Administrator. As a moderator for the session today, we're honored to have with us AGSIW's Chair of the Board of Directors, Ambassador Frank G. Wisner. Ambassador Wisner is the International Affairs Advisor for Squire Patton Boggs in New York. His diplomatic career spans 4 decades serving as U.S. Ambassador to Zambia, Egypt, the Philippines, and India. He has served as Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and as Undersecretary of State for International Security and Affairs and Senior Deputy Assistant Secretary for African Affairs. He worked closely with then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to launch negotiations with Zimbabwe and Namibia, and served as the U.S. Special Representative to the Kosovo status talks in 2005, where he played a crucial role in negotiating Kosovo's independence. A quick disclaimer before we start, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website tomorrow. Also a reminder to the audience, you are in listen-only mode, but you will be able to ask your questions through the Q&A function in Zoom, or you can also email us at info@agsiw.org or tag us on Twitter at GulfStatesInst. To take the questions, I will pop back up on the screen and we'll share the questions with the moderator after the opening discussion. With that, Ambassador Wisner, over to you.
Hey, Mo, let me start and thank you very much, you and your colleagues, for all the hard work you put into making this panel possible. As each of you, my fellow panelists, know, AGSIW is a relatively new institution. Our very purpose from the outset was to make it clear to the United States the multiple dynamics of this vital region that we are addressing today. And we've looked at it in three dimensions traditionally. First, we've taken a look at the Gulf in terms of its politics, its social dynamics, its economics, the rivalries and the interactions between the Gulf states. Second, we've studied very carefully and addressed the all-important frictions between the Gulf and the great eastern neighbor, Iran. Third, we've carefully examined the relationships between the Gulf and the broader Arab world, notably the civil wars that have raged in Libya and Yemen and Syria and in Iraq, and the role that the Gulf has played in the economic stabilization of Egypt, of Lebanon, of Morocco, Tunisia, and of course the Palestinian Authority. So today we turn in a fourth direction, a fourth dimension, and that is the western strategic edge of the Gulf across the Red Sea into the Horn of Africa, to take a look at the relationships between the Gulf and that region, and second, to look at the realities and issues involved in the dynamics underway today. So let me again thank my fellow panelists for being here to address these important questions that affect the United States, affect Europe, in addition, of course, to affecting the region. I'm going to begin today's discussion with a general question and ask each of the panelists to speak to that. And that is, why is the Red Sea dimension of the Gulf important? Why does it matter? And what are the key issues that you would, each of you, have us keep in mind? With a brief statement in that regard, Abdulaziz Sagr, let me ask you to begin, and then I will call in sequence on each of the other members of the Abdulaziz, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's a great pleasure to be in this webinar, and thank you for the Arab Gulf Institute. And also I'd like to welcome our colleagues and friends in this webinar, and thanks all the audience whom they are sharing, listening to our discussion today. If I start with the Horn of Africa or the Red Sea used to be very quiet, and it is one of the seas that has the least agreement in terms of environmental or economic collaboration or so. But 8 of the countries, upon the call of King Salman, have created a new association of Arab African country bordering the Red Sea. And they have signed an initial signature in January this year, 2020, hoping that this agreement will be ratified by all the 8 members countries, which include, of course, Jordan, Egypt, Somalia, Djibouti, Sudan, Eritrea also, and Saudi Arabia, of course. But Ethiopia did not join, and we were not expecting them because this has to deal with the Red Sea country bordering the Red Sea, and Israel did not join because they are neither Arab, neither African. So this is why these 2 countries, they were excluded from this arrangement. However, such an arrangement is not going to look at only the security and the defense aspect of it, but is going to be much more broader. It will look into the economic development, environment, social issue, and enhancing the relation and strengthen it to bring security and stability to the Red Sea and to the Horn of Africa. What we have seen since the last decade, of course, it's a much more interest from different international and regional power to be present in the Red Sea and also in the Horn of Africa. And that's have raised a lot of questions with regard to the Horn of Africa security. The challenges we used to have in the Horn of Africa, of course, was limited to the piracies, counter terrorism, and also the free movement of goods. So really it's the maritime security. And a lot of effort has been put by many countries. But also we have seen an interest from countries like Iran supporting the rebels, the Houthi in Yemen, and providing them with the long-range missiles. And for Saudi Arabia, Yemen is very important because even during the time of Prophet Mohammed, the Abraham al-Habashi, when he wanted to conquer Mecca, he had to cross through Yemen to go all the way down to Mecca. So the Red Sea is very important, when it comes to the crossing. And in Yemen today, we still have the largest camp of African refugees, and their final destination perhaps will be Saudi Arabia from the camp in Yemen. So Yemen's situation is very important for Saudi Arabia, and the new dimension of a regional power that have existed now in the Red Sea, i.e. Turkey and Iran, created a big threat to the Red Sea security. Of course, we welcome very much the US presence in the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea, but at the same time, we understand that this has some difficulty as the US decision is to gradually withdraw some of their presence from the region. So I think we need to think about how do we build capability to face all the challenges there? How do we support smaller country whom they have limited Navy capability to build a Coast Guard, excellent capability to be able to face all the challenges. We face challenges of terrorism, viruses, human trafficking, movement of goods, organized crime, all of these things. But at the same time, Saudi Arabia share about 1,750 kilo on the Red Sea. So for them, it's an extremely vital interest. Plus, the difference for us in Saudi and the other Gulf country, maybe 92% of our export and import comes through the three states that we have, the state of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandab, and Suez. So we do not have an access to the open sea, like, for instance, some of the Gulf country, Oman or United Arab Emirates, they have access to the open sea. Egypt, they have an access to the Mediterranean, and also some of the other countries. So for us, it's extremely vital to have a real security on the Red Sea, and our security will go beyond, we are very happy with the Egyptian control on the up north on the Suez, but at the same time, in the Horn of Africa, we still believe we need to be present, and we need to have a very strong presence in the Horn of Africa. We understand China have a lot of interest, economic interest, and they want to expand that one. But at the same time, we start seeing the Chinese, the Russian trying to have a presence, the Iranian, the Turk, everybody's trying to have a presence there. And this, of course, creates a lot of concern. It creates a lot of instability. It creates a need for, the country on their bordering the Red Sea to have a much more organized institutional that they can define their rules of engagement. They can go beyond the security and defense, as I said, and have much more in terms of the economic dimension. So Horn of Africa is a very vital interest for Saudi Arabia when it comes to the strategic issue. Red Sea, of course, now that we are expanding a lot of projects in the north part of the Red Sea, we need to have a stronger and a better security for the Red Sea to encourage all the FDI and all the foreign direct investment to that part. If you want me to stop here, I'll be happy to.
Thank you so much. That's a terrific opener. Abdul Mohammed, how do you see the issues and why they're important?
Well, to some extent, I share the issues raised by the previous speaker. For us, the starting point is that the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden is a shared space. It's not only an Arab Sea, it is also an African Sea. It's an Afro-Arab Sea. Therefore, the future economic interest and the security interest of the region of the Horn of Africa is very closely intertwined with that of the Arab Peninsula. Therefore, our maritime security concerns us, migration concerns us, trade between Asia and Europe passes, 40% of the trade passes through the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandab, and that concerns us, and the future development in integration, not only within the Horn of Africa, but between the Horn of Africa and the greater Arab world also concerns us. Therefore, Red Sea and the joint sharing of the Red Sea by all of the Horn of African countries is vital for our economic and security. For now, we are primarily one security zone, but in the future, the potential to be one economic zone is tremendous. So the relationship greatly matters to us. And one thing I would like to flag is the previous speaker As I said, I agree with most of what he said. But in terms of the membership of this council that has just been established, I hope it is going to be consolidated by phases. I see the current arrangement as just being phase one, and it should transit to phase two, where countries like Ethiopia should also be included to be members of the council. Ethiopia is only 60 kilometers away from the Red Sea, only 60 kilometers from the Red Sea, and that's just an accident of history. And we are a landlocked country, the number one locked country in the world, 100 million people. Therefore, access to the sea for Ethiopia is both an economic and national security issue, and therefore the Red Sea is a great deal to Ethiopia, and therefore the principle that should guide the establishment and the sustainability of the council should be the principle of inclusivity. And inclusivity does not just mean, you don't have to have a direct cost, but the fact of your proximity should also give you, the right to be a member of this council. There are precedents in other parts of the world, so it's not new. And therefore, let me just say that this is phase one of the process, and inclusivity is the best way to achieve sustainable peace and security.
Thank you very much. That's terrific. Alex, would you like to look at this from a European perspective?
Sure, and a good afternoon to you all. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Good. Well, thank you. I think there are the following points I would make from the European perspective. First, Europe has been engaged with this region for many, many years, from the colonial era onwards. And what strikes me is that the triangulation of Europe, the Horn, and the Gulf is something that should become a natural set of relationship. Why? First of all, the Horn, we're talking about almost 300 million people. It's going through the most extraordinary change. If you look at the countries that are literal to the Red Sea, Egypt, Sudan, Eritrea, and as Abdul was just saying, Ethiopia, 100 million people just behind, looking for access to the sea. Somaliland, Somalia, as the whole Somali coastline. This is a long coastline with a deep hinterland, which is still going through the most extraordinary seismic political transitions. If we all don't find a way of cooperating with each other to assist in these transitions, we will be, in my view, complicit in the failure of transitions, the attendant disappointments and disorder. And as Abdulaziz Saga was just hinting at, this is the western flank of the Gulf, and especially of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Therefore, there's a vital interest, both security and economic, as we see it, for Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, Europe, and the Horn to find ways of cooperating. The transitions themselves, the political ones, are issues which we care about a lot, because we in Europe have come to the conclusion that the authoritarian option is not an option in the region. That's because of demographics. When you've got 70% of a population, barely the age of 30, and who are restive, we have a new sort of, if you will, a demographic tidal wave breaking over a region and over the politics of the region. And unless the politics of a transition, whether it's Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan, which are the emblematic ones of the moment, are conducted in a way which include as many people and representative groups of the population. And this is not just fashionable democratic talk. It is quite straightforwardly what is pragmatic and, in our view, necessary to achieve stability. We will have bigger problems. That means disorder on the Red Sea, threats to the passage of trade, probably terrorism, certainly a lot of this organized crime, which anyway is becoming rampant in the region. That will infect the Gulf. It will also infect Europe. Therefore, there's every interest to get coordinated in addressing these issues. In conclusion, as an opening thought or two, the one thing that would worry me, and it's something that the European Union has tried to address quite publicly about 2-3 years ago, and it is that in recent years, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of international actors becoming strategically interested in the Horn. It's like a cascade. The United States has been there for many years, China, but there is a competition. There is the Gulf. Russia is beginning to show an interest. Europe is traditionally there. We all come at it from different directions and with different values, with somewhat different interests. What I do know is this, that if we don't find a way of managing the relationships and helping this region manage this international, whether it is, if we don't convert it, as the title of our talk speaks of, from cooperation to, from competition to cooperation, we will end up with a rather nasty and potentially lethal traffic jam in this region. And it won't be the first time this has happened, but it could get quite nasty. It's the last thing we should wish upon the region, let alone all our collective interests. And I think that's really the challenge we have before us. Thank you, Frank.
Absolutely, Alex. Well underscored. Kate, do you want to look at the issue from an American perspective? Why does this matter to the United States? What are the key issues that we need to contend with?
Thank you, Ambassador Wisner, and thank you to AGSIW for the invitation to join this very distinguished panel this morning. Just a caveat that I don't speak for U.S. policy officially or the Department of Defense. The Africa Center for Strategic Studies is an academic institution at the National Defense University. So I'll be speaking as an academic and a former official from the USAID perspective, if I could. And just to really echo many of the points that have already been made, that the Horn of Africa is really vitally important to the United States, should be understood that way, that these historic, truly decades in the making opportunities for transition in Ethiopia and Sudan especially should compel attention and concerted, coordinated strategic action and support. And frankly, that the biggest challenges to these political transitions succeeding and moving towards democratic, inclusive, accountable governance for the 150 million people combined in these two countries is really this increasing rivalry and competition, contestation that we see most especially from allies and partners of the United States, if we're being candid, from Middle Eastern countries working out their issues and competition through these transitions and challenges and opportunities that we see presently in the Horn of Africa. And so for the United States, those of us who've worked inside our interagency know we typically look at things either from the African sub-Saharan perspective or from a Middle East, North African perspective. And this means that we have to get beyond our own bureaucratic seams and sort of siloed ways of looking at the discrete challenges for each country to see this as a broader interconnected region. And so it's very encouraging that this conversation is happening today and that all of the colleagues have emphasized this point importantly already.
Kate, thanks a lot. That's perfect. Let me take us now into several of the issues that each of you have touched on. And I want to begin with Sudan, a country of huge importance, incredible resources, and also convulsed in a period of transition from an old regime towards a new, hopefully different political future. Abdulaziz, I want to turn to you and Alex, Kate, and ask you for a quick comment on where are we headed in Sudan? How can the parties be brought together? How can the interests of the UAE and Saudi Arabia be involved in a manner that will bring about a useful outcome in the traditional rivalries between civilians and military, and assist also in the peace initiatives to bring peace between the central government and its several regions. So with that big menu, take a couple of minutes and tell me how you see Sudan. Abdulaziz, you start.
Thank you, Ambassador. You know, we have one of the largest population in Saudi Arabia from the expat part, from the Arab countries, from Sudan. So we have a huge number of them living in Saudi Arabia, and they have, a great also interest. Last year in August, or in fact, the 12th of August this year, 2020, Saudi Arabia called for the Friend of Sudan and have really stated their clear position that they wish to see a unity of Sudan. They would like to see Sudan as part of the Arab League, of course, and part of the African Union, play its role there. We understand the new situation there, so we believe that it is the right of the Sudanese people to choose their path, but we would like to see an end for all this conflict and this dispute, and also bringing all the parties together. So we very much encourage the movement toward democratization, considering all parties, including youth, women, their role in the new constitution, and a significant role also to be the participation of the civil society there. That is as far as the official concern. Also, Saudi Arabia have decided, or last year have pledged some financial support to Sudan. Part of it, of course, has been made, which is $250 million to support the central bank, and other $250 million was for more development. UAE also have pledged some commitment also there. But at the same time, we believe that Sudan deserves to have a much better structure to encourage all international investment, and we are very much in support and in contact Saudi Arabia with all the different parties involved, whether in the Sadd al-Nahda or on the current development situation. I think we also want to have a serious consideration of the COVID-19 and its impact on the development in Sudan and what's happening there. Also the new flood situation there, which of course have a lot of humanitarian issue, and I'm sure Saudi Arabia, one of the countries that will rush to support and to extend any aid support can be for Sudan through the King Salman Aid Organization and Relief Organization there. But we're very much in support of the new movement. We're very much in support of the discussion with the different parties. We wish that they become together. We understand two of them, Noor in Paris and Abdulaziz al-Hilo, they do have their own position, which again, it's up to the Sudanese people to decide whether they would like to have a secular state or non-secular state, whether they would like to have a federal or non-federal. This is a very much internal, but we would like to see a peaceful discussion and a peaceful transition and implementation of all the constitutional issues that have taken place. And Saudi remain a great and a big supporter for a country that, we share with them the Red Sea. We have a lot of their inhabitants. They live in Saudi Arabia. We have a long history. We have shared a lot of, things with them.
Thank you so much. I took note of the fact that the Sudanese have recently made a statement that they're headed into a secular state, that is, without giving any particular preference to any religion. Kate, can you pick it up there? There are particular issues related to the United States in Sudan. Do you want to touch on those?
Well, thank you. The United States indeed has a long history as well in Sudan, and working for democratic change and accountability to citizens. And so this is truly the most historic opportunity to see fundamental reforms and to see civilian-led rule finally take hold. And I would just like to emphasize, I think that's the most critical thing here for the legitimacy of the Sudanese state going forward, and to see the success of what the youth of Sudan and the many citizens who came out onto the street were advocating for. Certainly, improvements in day-to-day economic livelihood were fundamental to that, but more transformatively as well, political representation and voice and accountability. And so for the United States to see the primacy of the democratic transition and this fundamental transformation succeed, I think is truly paramount. And I believe should be what all of the efforts and the external actors are marshaled towards. It's not clear, I would say, from an observation standpoint, that the various competing interests and energies of all of Sudan's various external actors are indeed pulling in the direction that Dr. Abdulaziz just mentioned, for the people of Sudan to be able to decide what kind of state they want, what forms of government, levels of governance, etc. It is, of course, encouraging that peace agreements are being signed and hopefully long-standing resolution of fundamental grievances and issues will follow. But really the most critical thing for us to keep our eye on, I think, for this transitional period is when true civilian leadership and control of the government does come about. Because right now I think we're still seeing cohabitation, if we can say it that way, between the military-led Sovereign Council and, of course, the civilian-led Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. And so how that continues to proceed and how the Sudanese people are able to navigate a constitutional conference to decide their fundamental questions for themselves is of utmost importance, even as the country is severely challenged economically, already from a macroeconomic situation, compounded by COVID, compounded by floods, by locusts, by ongoing humanitarian distress. That is unfortunately a sad reality for Sudan.
Alex, one of the reasons Sudan is so pivotal is an issue that I know is on your mind, and that is the future of sharing of the Nile waters between Ethiopia and the downstream states, Sudan and Egypt. You might want to pick up on what Abdulaziz and Kate said about Sudan in general, but give us your perspective on the Nile water issue. It's absolutely vital.
Yeah, well, indeed it is, and it's actually central to the future of Sudan. And therefore the negotiations and the discussions, which have occasionally become rather poisonous over the last years, need to be set on a course that's going to end up being to the benefit of certainly the three countries of the Blue Nile Basin. As things stand, my own view is we could get to an agreement. I would go back to something I was mentioning at the outset, and we all need to think about, but which is key to Sudan. Sudan is going to be a major beneficiary of the dam that is being built, the GERD, in Ethiopia. It will give Sudan an extra harvest. It will be the replacement of revenue that was lost when South Sudan acquired its independence. Now, what that really means is, can Egypt and Ethiopia, between the two of which Sudan is sandwiched, find an accommodation in which the reality of a dam that is now being filled has altered the strategic balance? That's the reality. People often don't read their history and understand that 300 years ago, an Ethiopian emperor seriously thought of diverting the Nile at its source because of the threats from Egypt. So there is history and there's baggage. We've got to climb through that. And I say this very pointedly, specifically because of you all who are hosting this discussion and the many participants from across on the Gulf, that every effort that can be made to help the countries understand that a poisonous diplomatic debate actually could be turned into a quite extraordinary business opportunity for the three countries, Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. It's about managing water security, managing electricity, but thinking big. and I think the time's come for us to help the political leaderships in these countries look to that opportunity. It sounds easy to say, but let's not forget something else with the Nile issue. We're no longer dealing with a couple of countries, in this case, Ethiopia and Sudan, who just, the heads of state could pick up a phone and have a chat with each other and sort some things out. Now you've got public opinion, and it is playing out on this issue. And we all need to find a way of helping contribute to that. It also plays an important role in Egypt. So I think Egypt, with the first filling of the first year, Egypt has reacted with, I would say, with a very interesting restraint. I think one looks to Ethiopia to understand the historical opportunity it has in its hands right now to really show that it can lead in a region, given this asset, this astonishing asset it has at its disposal. Now, that said, where does it leave Sudan? Sudan needs to get normalized internationally, which it is not. Sudan is a fashionable political project, which is totally abnormal in its international setting. It is still subject to all forms of sanctions, including the state-sponsored terrorism legislation, which is a complicated affair in and of itself. But the isolation of Sudan means that this country has not got the financial oxygen with which to, if you will, undergird a very painful set of reforms. And a lot of the politics is going to revolve around money. How does this country raise revenue now from sources which frankly are hiding revenue from the new cohabitation and the new transitional authorities? In other words, how does this country go from being systematically off budget, which is the polite way of saying a kleptocracy, to being on budget and being a normal country that can operate with the international financial institutions and therefore benefit from peace agreements, in the absence of which military budgets have had a primordial role in the way the country has managed itself. So get the peace, start getting the country out of its isolation, which I hope the peace will contribute to. That will generate the type of revenue which I hope this country will benefit from, as it deserves to. And it's in that context that if we can get arrangements on the Nile, Sudan is poised, for those of us who know Sudan well, to in effect be a breadbasket, not just for Sudan, but for a much wider region, including the Gulf. Therein lie the longer term answers. Can we find a way of creating an international discipline and cooperation to get to that? And that means the Sudanese themselves need to understand fully the stakes. Otherwise, they will make the mistake of bargaining and haggling their way to oblivion rather than to prosperity. But our friend Abdul Mohammed has known Sudan for many years and been heavily involved with President Beki on some of these issues too. Over to you. Thank you.
Mohammed, Alex just set you up to carry the conversation on Sudan further, but I hope you can deal with, in addition, another unresolved political transition, and that's the situation in Somalia. So start with Sudan and give us also your views on the Somali transition that remains unresolved.
I think on Sudan, let me just re-emphasize what has been said by my colleagues. Last year, the transition was welcomed with a very pleasing note. The transitional arrangement was a product of a very creative negotiation, which resulted in a very cohabitation government. As you know, the international community supported the negotiation led by the African Union in a manner that resulted in this cohabitation arrangement. A year later, what do we have? A year later, I think the one that we need to focus on is that the economic situation has reached a melting point. And the Sudanese are extremely exhausted by the dire economic environment. The Sudanese alone cannot solve the economic problem. They can't, they just can't. And therefore, massive economic assistance and massive economic support must be given by the international community. As you know, in June, there was a donors conference, but the pledges that were given at the June conference was not adequate at all. Since we are dealing with the Gulf countries, my strong opinion is that the Gulf countries must prioritize economic engagement with the Sudan. Sudan will be a place where the Gulf countries can immediately demonstrate that they have a strategic interest in the stability of the Horn of Africa by demonstrating their economic support for the Sudan. Another issue that I want to raise is that agreement with the rebels. Agreement with the rebels that was achieved in the past week or so and scheduled to be signed in October the 2nd. One of the things that has been agreed upon is that the transition period now will be extended beyond what was provided for in the initial agreement, maybe for additional 1 more year. Most important is that the coming of the rebels to the government will facilitate the constitutional making process, which is extremely important for the future of the Sudan. Therefore, the oppositions, especially the rebel groups, must be ready to really engage in this constitutional making process seriously and strategically. Sudan cannot afford a failed transition. So the rebels must ready themselves to govern or to help assist governance, achieve a long-term governance. And we need also to keep in mind, as I think Kate said, there are 2 transitions right now in the Sudan which will happen in a sequence. One is from the military to the civilian, which is supposed to take place sometimes in March or April. This is very important. And then another transition to a constitutional order facilitated by election. All of these are sensitive calendars, and this must be supported in a manner that will be helpful for the Sudanese to achieve cohesion in managing this transition. So the international community, more importantly also the Gulf countries, the US, Europe, must be informed by this political calendar and assist the Sudanese achieve a successful transition. This is very important. Regarding Somalia, recent engagement, political engagement among the Somali parties, to my pleasant surprise and to the surprise of many, ended up with positive results. A technical committee that was established facilitated modalities that will make possible the upcoming election. So what they have agreed upon recently is a 1 man, 1 vote proposed by the federal government, by the president, is now vacated, which means they are now agreed to shelve the 1 man, 1 vote universal suffrage, and they have agreed to expand the 51 electoral college kind of committee that selects the parliament from 51 to 301, and by doing that, they will broaden the participation by broader members of the society, including the civil society as well. So they have agreed for the electoral college to be constituted from 51 to 301, and that will provide for an inclusive, at least approximate inclusive process. The other thing they have agreed, which is also very important, is election in Somalia will be held on time. This is again an important agreement. There are 5 states, federal states, as you know, in member states in Somalia. 3 of them have participated from the beginning. 2 of them entered a reservation, but the process continues to engage them, and their reservations hopefully will be addressed successfully in the coming weeks. My conclusion about Somalia is Somali politics is evolving, and that is really remarkable. For example, the president of Somalia wanted to transform a clan-based system into a universal suffrage. The system gave him a pushback, but he compromised, and that compromise made it possible to move forward. Large areas of the country still remain under Al-Shabaab. Therefore, there are security issues associated with that. Another outstanding issue is the need to consummate the constitutional review process. It has not been done. And then also a census needs to be taken. And that also requires an agreement given the security challenges. But the good news for me is that elite bargain and electoral politics in Somalia is maturing, is getting sophisticated. And the Somali politics in the past 30 years have moved from warlordism to Islamic court to pluralism and to diaspora engagement. And now they have reached where elite bargain is getting institutionalized in Somalia. And my wish is that other countries in our region would also learn from the Somalis in terms of managing elite bargain. Regarding the Gulf countries.
Go ahead. Please continue.
Excuse me?
Abdul Mohammed, I cut you off unintentionally. Please finish your sentence.
Yeah, I think regarding the engagement of the Gulf countries in Somalia, it is heavy. As you know, Qatar and Turkey support the central government, the President Formajo's government. So how will UAE and Saudi Arabia respond to this new promising development is to be seen. But at all costs, everybody must make sure that the Libya scenario will not be duplicated in Somalia. And the international community has received positively the agreement reached in Somalia, and I'm sure the Gulf countries will also do the same and assist the Somalis to consummate this transition. Regional governments, are also positioning themselves to be helpful to this process. And the peacekeeping force under the African Union, AMISOM, will also trigger the security transition. All of these transitions, given the legwork already done by the Somalis, the international community will have to step in to make sure this transition is successfully consummated.
Mohammed, you have opened the door to my next question, which is how to manage regional rivalries. You touched on the fact that Turkey and Qatar have played their cards in the Somali equation, but it's not just in Somalia that outside powers have stepped in. I want to ask Abdulaziz if you could pick up there, Alex, Kate, very quickly, each of you comment on how you think the externalities, how these external rivalries can be managed so that they do not further complicate the many problems you all have addressed today. Abdulaziz, let me begin with you.
I mentioned before we are absolutely not welcoming any Turkish or Iranian or even a Chinese or Russian presence in the Red Sea or the Horn of Africa, because we can see the complication with that one. We understand the European have an old history, whether it's France or Britain or even Spain or Italy. The American, of course, presence in Djibouti or some of the other country is very much welcome, because we used to have the coordination on the vital interest. 5.5% or almost close to 6% of the oil global production goes through the Horn of Africa. So Iran presence, of course, supported Yemen, have created a lot of problem for us. Turkey presence with Qatar, unfortunately, in Somalia, we are very happy to see that government is off now of the Somal, and now they are going to think of a much more national government really in Somalia instead of the government by proxy close to other external power. The external power, as long as there is a coordination in terms of the security of the maritime security, the counter-terrorism, counter-viruses, is very much welcome. But to have an external presence like regional power like Iran and Turkey, which only play a disturbant role and also play a role for the expansion of their spheres of influence in the territory, whether using a sectarian dimension, that Iran will use the Shiism to expand and to enhance their presence in the Horn of Africa, or even some of the African sub-Sahara country or the Red Sea country, or Turkey by using the Muslim Brotherhood, again, another division of the Sunni side, using that sectarianism also as a sphere of influence and expansion. Both are not welcome and not accepted for us. I think we would like to see a much more inclusive, as Abdul have said before, we would like to see a much more broader collaboration to ensure security, stability, bring development, work with the UN Millennium Goal that we are all hoping to achieve. All of that would be very much, of course, welcomed by Saudi Arabia and country from the Gulf like United Arab Emirates, of course.
Excellent. Alex, do you want to touch on the external issue?
Yes, I certainly would. I think as a country which I've had to deal with intimately for almost 10 years now, I want to first of all underscore what Abdul was saying. To see where Somalia is now compared to where it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and even further back, it's quite remarkable. That is, if you're not a purist. This is about a country that is emerging from a trauma which we would not wish to visit on anyone. Now, what is remarkable is that just last March, 6 months ago, Somalia was given the green light to get towards debt relief by the IMF and the World Bank. Now, I think that that is a quite remarkable development because it opens the door for one of the most entrepreneurial people in the region to actually take advantage of and become part of, once again, the international financial system. And I believe that in a country like Somalia, it has often been the absence of available cash, as it were, in an economy that has often eliminated the necessary incentives to make good politics occur. And thus violence was always an option that was readier than for many others. Now, I think this is something we need to help the Somalis continue on this path. I think there are moves we're seeing, it's not for me to say whether Somalia is becoming more mature or not. I am delighted to see that the primacy of politics is beginning to be demonstrated. And what is quite remarkable is that it is Somalia which is demonstrating something to the other countries of the region. In other words, get together and have a real baraza, as we say. Sit on, just negotiate your way through things. If it takes 6 weeks, 6 months to do it, just do it. Just don't go killing. In the meantime, various forms of representation are created. That is why Abdul is referring to, the electoral system that, is being created, which certainly is not satisfactory for those who believe in one person, one vote, but it does give a form of representation. Now, it's in this that the international community has, I think, to be quite frank, to just get its act together. We can no longer sit there and become party either as an actor or as a spectator to the sort of habit in which Somalia is and its politics are turned into an auction financed by external actors. That is one of the issues, because in turn, you have different parties in Somalia, individuals, groups, whatever, who the moment they know there's a marketplace, they'll go to it to ask for money in order to advance their political interests. Now, the really interesting thing is, can we, Europeans, Americans, the Gulf, especially, Turkey, which is very present, can we sit down and have an honest discussion about this or not? Because what I've just mentioned is actually the real issue.
Thank you.
If we can't, we risk having just a continuous bad habit with Somalis actually beginning to set the example of how to try to be really patriotic as opposed to just sellouts to foreign interests, to put it very bluntly.
Alex, thank you. That's enormously important, this external dimension and how to manage it. Look, we've had a very good and thorough discussion of many of the issues. Some we've not been able.
Apologies for that. It seems like perhaps Ambassador Wisner is having some technical difficulties. I think perhaps if I can jump in. Oh, here you go. All right, Ambassador Wisner.
Good, go ahead.
I think you got cut off for a little bit, but I suspect you invited me to pose some audience questions to our speakers. Many of them have been answered towards the end of the discussion, but I was able to put some together along similar topics. We had a few similar questions on Saudi Arabia's ambitions in the Red Sea from Charles Forrester, Ian Anthony from CIPRI Stockholm, and Don Fierro, who ask about the reasoning behind Saudi Arabia's acquisition of islands from Egypt in 2017. Will similar acquisitions happen, and what does it mean for Saudi Arabia and the Red Sea security? Along similar lines, how will the developments of NEOM affect the region, and how can urban developments such as NEOM in Saudi Arabia be an engine for regional cooperation and an incubator of best practice for sustainable urban development? I assume these were posed towards Dr. Abdulaziz.
You know, Saudi Arabia, they were very much concerned in solving all this naval border issue. And this is why we were very happy to reach an agreement with Egypt and resolve the issue of the Sanafir and finalize that. What Saudi Arabia is trying to avoid today very much is to have the new Mediterranean situation where we have between Turkey and Greek. We do not wish to see that mess around that is taking place today in the Mediterranean, and we are very concerned about that. So to avoid that, we need to have a proper maritime agreement where we need to have the border agreement to be resolved in the Red Sea. And because, as I mentioned before, Saudi is very much looking to have a huge investment in the upper part of the Red Sea, whether it's a NEOM or Red Sea project or even some of the other projects there. So it's very important to have stability, security, agreement, border, resolving, those issues. This is why, from both sides we look at it. We look at it that we do not wish to have a conflict in the Red Sea as what is happening today to avoid what may happen in the Mediterranean. On the other hand, having a huge investment on the Red Sea would need, of course, a better security, better stability, instead of having an organized crime crossing the Red Sea from different parts and so on.
I think, Abdulaziz, you got a question about the way NEOM will be developed as a model for the future of urban development and economic management in the region.
Well, of course, there's a huge master plan for NEOM, and I'm sure the government today now they are, putting it in different stage, but that different stage will take place. We start seeing a lot of building the camp, organizing the company, looking for the different vendor, finishing a lot of the design, engineering work, recruitment. It's all taking place. So I think we will see that development in NEOM. It might be not at the high speed we wish to have it. It might because we have to take in mind, I mean, since COVID-19, the whole world has been slowed down. Movement of people, movement of worker, construction department, of course, have been affected, but also it will have a major, huge commercial and investment attraction point.
Excellent. Raymond?
Great. Along similar lines on linkages between the Horn and the Gulf, Ambassador Barbara Bodine suggests that perhaps Gulf countries who are being called for to provide massive assistance for Sudan are and one way or another tapped out because they're also the source of funding for aid for Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, and others. Is there a risk for kind of a lack of aid, or is there perhaps a possibility for increased business, kind of on the lines of education, on the lines of let's say agriculture, or is there a room for soft power for the Gulf's monetary capabilities that could ease or end the stalemate of the negotiations on the GERD dam, for example?
Abdulaziz, I think you're on the firing line again.
Maybe I'd like to mention two things, just in terms of the Saudi-Ethiopia relation and how both with the African Union have played a significant role since August last year. So again, Saudi take quite an interesting position with the three countries, Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, bearing in mind that they are all important and we have a great relation with all of them. When it comes to Sudan, I think my worries is because we have low oil prices, unfortunately, since COVID-19 as a result of the low consumption globally, this will have an impact on the amount of aid to be provided to all other countries that they used to receive aid from Saudi Arabia and also from the other Gulf countries. However, I think if we combine the three things, we're very happy to see the European role in Sudan, i.e. particularly the European Union, Germany, and France, trying to help to get Sudan off the sanction list, and also trying to help with the Paris Club with the rescheduling of the Sudan debts, also in terms of the aid development for health and education, particularly in these two areas. As Ambassador Alex said before, Sudan could be the basket of all the region in terms of agricultural availability, but that of course would require fighting corruption, new and a better governance to be implemented in Sudan, encouraging foreign investment in a much better basis, and help to build the necessary infrastructure that will attract all this massive and a big foreign investment to be in Sudan on the field that will help to have a local employment and a better training also to work closely. So from that angle, I'm sure we will contribute, but we need the rest of the world also contribution and to help in that. And without having all the components, the helping the rescheduling of Sudan, that's getting them out of the boycott list and the sanction, and then encourage the investment, have a local government that can deal with all this issue, bring stability and agreement between the different parties together there, move from the military to the civilian as according to the schedule that was mentioned, March or April next year. That of course will have a significant help.
Kate and Alex, you want to add to that as to the issue of resource availability from the United States and Europe in these stressed times? How realistic can we look to the West to be investors on a private sector basis or additional government assistance? Whichever you. Kate, do you want to go first?
Well, certainly, and maybe just to echo Alex's points from previously, absolutely we need to move past SST, the state sponsors of terrorism designation for Sudan, to unblock official development assistance, to unblock support from the international financial institutions, and to lift the general pariah status that still hangs over a cloud for the new transition process in Sudan. that would be a key step to supporting the political transition more broadly. And I think just to put in larger focus that we have three fundamental projects of state formation underway now in the Horn of Africa, all of which require massive external resources and support, ideally coherent, ideally transparent, on budget, all pointing in the same direction towards liberal democratic accountability of governments to citizens. And so for Sudan and Ethiopia, which are the newer ones underway, Somalia, which is the longer one underway, we don't see yet the level of resources that any of these important opportunities to consolidate democratic transition now afford and rightly deserve. Just to recall, in 2005, when the Comprehensive Peace Agreement for Sudan was signed and the pledging conference took place shortly thereafter, the United States pledged $1.9 billion in support of implementing that agreement. I think to Abdul's point, in June, the United States pledge was $350 million. And sadly, much of that, unfortunately, has to be humanitarian assistance right now because of the ongoing challenges in the country. So I don't control the aid budgets, and I can't predict the political winds, but would that the United States would see again the vital importance of investing our official assistance into this specific situation in Sudan and Ethiopia, across the region, to be able to shore up the political transitions that must succeed. We really can't discount the possibility for state collapse in Sudan, in Ethiopia even, or for reversal in Somalia. And Sudan or Ethiopia would be a fundamental catastrophe the size of which the world has not yet seen on a humanitarian level. And so the stakes are really, really the highest that we could have at the moment.
Okay, thank you. It's a real call to action. Alex?
Yeah, I first of all, just to pick up directly on what Kate is saying, I quite agree. I think it's a case of champagne tastes, beer budget, and it's time to get to champagne budget. I forgive those who don't do champagne, if I may apologize for that allusion. But here's the issue. We've got two or three tracks we need to work on. One, let's be clear, one of the biggest sources of income in these countries are remittances. And those come from Western countries and expatriates, migrants in the Gulf. How one can try to regularize and make that more effective at a time, and this is where Abdulaziz is absolutely right, the very people who are the source of remittances are the ones who are probably being hardest hit by the economic downturn created by COVID. We've got to find a way and see if there's a way we can enhance how remittances keep coming back into this region. It is absolutely a game changer if one can do some of that. And that gets you into technology, mobile money, things like this. Second, private sector engagement. Yes, completely. Places like Sudan, I think, are ripe for it if only they can create a predictable political and regulatory structure. And then I think there's a lot of people from the Gulf and Europe who would love to get involved there. Ethiopia is a much more complicated country because it's got to climb out of its own ideological past and predilection for anything that is state as opposed to non-state. And that is part of the transition that Ethiopia has to go to. And Somalia is just clean up the system in order for people to invest. So I think the degree to which the aid systems can see themselves as catalysts for private sector, for remittances, we can begin to multiply the resources. Finally, I think in Ethiopia, but also in Sudan, there is a ton of money that has been illicitly people have absconded with over the last 20 years or more. And if we can now use the sort of tools at our disposal that relate to money laundering or the illicit export of money, and start chasing that down. The IFIs can do it, others can do it. You may find that there are ways of retrieving some money that countries need badly right now, just for the immediate cash flow short term. So we've got to be creative. We've got to help the governments be creative, and we've got to show we're ready to collaborate as we do that. That's the only way we'll get to. I fear we will never get to the original amounts that Kate was referring to. I wish it were the case. So how can we be as imaginative as possible? So I'm personally in favor of the private sector, and we all now have ways of guaranteeing private sector investment. There's different instruments that have been created in the last years, which I think could be very helpful. And it's about jointly working. I mean, Abdulaziz, Saudi business, European business, there's all sorts of stuff one can do jointly with people, and especially in countries like Sudan, where there is a strong tradition of business experience to move ahead. Those would be some of my thoughts.
Excellent thoughts. Raymond, let's take one more question. Or Abdul Mohammed, you wanted to add a point? You raised
if I may, can I raise 2 points very briefly? One is our discussion should be informed, and most of the speakers have repeatedly mentioned it, and I would like also to emphasize that, is that on the Horn of Africa side, the 3 consequential countries, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Somalia, are undergoing a very intense transition. This is important to comprehend. And this transition internally is informed by polarization, elite polarization, elite cohesion is not there, and there are struggling with the institutions. Legitimacy of institutions are also being seriously challenged. So they have to deal with that. And then there are external factors, which again, I would like to emphasize, is that there are 2 manifestations of external factors, which will either provide a conducive environment for the transition, or impede it, or block it. One is big power competition. And the big power competition in our region, in the Red Sea, is between China and US. All right, how that manifests itself in our region is going to be very important. I hope we will not be forced to take sides, because taking sides will have adverse consequences. The other one, of course, we have talked about it, is middle power competition in our region. This is primarily the Gulf countries and those who are from another. So, this competition should not be manifested in its extreme form in our region. Some of these countries are short-term sighted and impulsive and unpredictable, and all of this actually will be a factor in our destabilization. To make a larger point, after COVID, well, COVID-19 is not over yet, but one could make an educated guess that, after COVID-19, the economic environment in the region is going to be very difficult, requiring substantive economic engagement. And the countries of the Gulf countries can play an important role if they think strategically. There has been a tangible economic relationship between the Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia and UAE, in the Horn of Africa. It has been interrupted by COVID-19, and it must be resumed more intensely. I don't know if the Saudi Africa summit, which was scheduled for last March and was postponed, is going to be reconvened. If it does, then there is an opportunity to renew economic engagement on new terms, on new with new strategic commitment to facilitate the relationship, and whatever the Gulf countries' interest is in the Horn of Africa, it will be much more facilitated and realized with economic investment, with economic relationship, and downgrading security. So economic is the key to making the region, both on the Horn of Africa side, on the Arab side, more cohesive and more prosperous.
Raymond, I think we are closing in on the limits of our meeting and the patience of our audience. I regret to say, I think we're going to have to bring this utterly fascinating conversation to a conclusion. And I'm sorry we have to do it. The specter of COVID has been raised, and I wish we could get into that more deeply, particularly with regard to decisions by the G20, debt relief, another very important question facing all of Africa, the Horn not being an exception. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me say thank you for participating. Please let me thank as well our panelists today. They've all been original, thoughtful, extraordinarily spellbinding as far as I'm concerned. I come away with 4 basic conclusions. The first is that the transitions that we've pointed to today are in full swing. Their outcome is vitally important. And I think speaker after speaker has pointed to the fact that each country, given its own circumstances, has got to find its way forward, balancing in its own manner, as the Sudanese and Somalis are indicating, the right kind of stable outcome, and that the outside needs to support, not interfere with, what's going on in these political transitions. Second, the need to intensify cross-Red Sea cooperation. There is no region that is more affected by what happens in the Horn than is the Gulf. And I really am much taken by that. Third, that leads me to the unanswered question of how competition will be managed. How competition involving Turkey, competition involving Qatar, competition involving great powers, the United States and China. I feel we are at a moment in our history in which blame games serve no useful purpose and can thoroughly destabilize this region and its prospects and its security impacts on all of our interests. So I'd like to think more imagination, more work on the management of rivalries is important. And finally, the region that we've talked about today needs help, whether it's debt relief, development assistance flows, the end of sanctions, private sector investment. There are huge opportunities, and I think each of you has sounded a call to action on that front, as well as leading us into a path of greater understanding of the subtleties of many issues that the region faces. So let me close by saying thank you, Abdulaziz, Abdul Mohammed, Alex Rondos, and Kate Knopf. Thank all of you for participating, and Raymond, to you and your colleagues at AGSIW for putting on this extraordinarily useful event. Thank all of you.